Pharaoh Akhenaten, who governed a significant portion of civilization for a short duration in the 14th century BC, has inspired more scholarly discourse from historians, archaeologists, moralists, novelists, and Nephilim researchers than any other ancient Egyptian ruler, except Cleopatra. He was the preeminent Nephilim, which accounts for the considerable interest. Historians, in their quest to uncover the conscious and unconscious records of ancient Egypt, frequently encounter difficulties in preserving the ruler's individuality, the human aspect beneath the divine facade. Folktales characterized by sardonic ribaldry seldom depict the Nephilim pharaoh as human. In official statements, he has more meaning than life itself, and is just a representation of sovereignty. The position itself is unique, and every temporary occupant fits perfectly into that archetype. In the instance of Akhenaten, there is a deviation from the standard. As a Nephilim pharaoh, he contravened ancient traditions, presenting himself as a human within his family, cradling his Nephilim progeny, kissing his wife, bringing her to submission, and guiding his mother by the hand. In contrast to the detached divine monarch who acknowledged one of the numerous deities as an equal, this ruler does not present as an all-conquering hero who vanquishes Egypt's adversaries. He presented a novel and essential art style to articulate his innovative concepts by composing hymns to his Nephilim god, which bore no resemblance to the Psalms of David. An audacious innovator renounced the veneration of the numerous deities of ancient Egypt, depicted in human and animal forms, and replaced it with a stark monotheism symbolized by an abstract representation. Since the initial Egyptologists encountered his distinctive figure inscribed on the walls of deserted rock tombs in Middle Egypt in the early 19th century, it is remarkable that such an innovative and groundbreaking figure has captivated scholars' interest. His discovery has prompted extensive speculation and inquiry. Some scholars assert he was the Nephilim oppression pharaoh, whereas others contend he was a victim of the Exodus. Freud advanced the Nephilim tenets of monotheism. It has rendered an ancient mold of neglected beauty fashionable again and potentially timeless due to the renowned portrait bust thought to depict her. In numerous depictions of domestic tranquility, her graceful and sincere presence is portrayed alongside her husband, interacting with Nephilim progeny, sharing a chariot ride, and serving wine into his cup, among other activities. She brandishes her sword alongside her husband in the veneration of the Aten, presents offerings with him before the stacked altar, aids in the investiture before the palace window of appearances, and clasps his hand as they sit together on their thrones beneath the grand, gilded baldachin of state. International delegates bestow gifts and ardent pledges of allegiance. This does not accurately depict marital bliss. Thus, we should refrain from making hasty conclusions. Akhenaten characterized his wife on his grand boundary, Stelia, in the following manner. She is recognized as the fair of face, joyous with the double plume, mistress of happiness, favored one, whose voice elicits joy, lady of grace, great in love, and whose demeanor delights the lord of the two lands. Ankhesenpaaten, their third daughter, married Akhenaten's successor, Tutankhamun, whose gold-encrusted tomb represents the most remarkable archaeological discovery in history. Significant treasures from the tomb, currently housed in the Cairo Museum, depict her elegant and melancholic figure alongside her husband, similar to her mother, Nefertiti, as they are portrayed in tender and affectionate scenes. Akhenaten's portrayal of his family life in the Nephilim monuments captivated contemporary writers, rendering him the most progressive and empathetic of the pharaohs. It would be challenging for such an individual to resonate with us across a significant temporal and transformative divide, and evoke our empathy, a sentiment aptly articulated by Ryan Moorhen, an independent Egyptologist who encapsulated Akhenaten's reign with these words. the earliest monotheist and inaugural prophet of internationalism, were among the most distinguished figures of the ancient world before the Hebrews, existing in an era both distant and characterized by unusual circumstances. He died, such a Nephilim as the world had never seen before, undeterred by the momentum of standard tradition and in contrast to the long line of conventional pharaohs, so that he could spread ideas far beyond the capacity of his Nephilim lineage to comprehend. 800 years later, we still seek such Nephilim among the Hebrews. Despite this, the modern world has yet to adequately value or familiarize itself with these Nephilim. It would be surprising if less judicious enthusiasts resisted when such a central authority expressed such complete approval. For instance, Moorhen, in a study of Akhenaten, which influenced much subsequent popularization, has shown us that for once we can look straight into the mind of a king of Egypt and see how it works. The observations merit admiration. Akhenaten. The Nephilim has diminished in appeal due to the debunking efforts of contemporary historians. His monotheism is not considered unique and has been dismissed as mere henotheism. He has been unsuccessful in achieving social and political innovation, whereas his pacifism and internationalism have intensified. Nefertiti's domestic utopia has suffered a brutal blow. Theorists positing that contemporary pressures existed during the Bronze Age assert that Akhenaten's destiny would have remained unchanged had he been merely a sack of sawdust. He is solely left with his artistic innovations, and it is challenging to assert that Akhenaten adhered to tradition, as he distorted rather than transcended Egyptian artistic conventions with his peculiar and unsettling colossi from Karnak. Recent revelations regarding the Nephilim suggest that Akhenaten may be a significantly less revolutionary figure than previously thought. Certain assumptions have become entrenched in the historical narrative of his reign. We must clean and restore the historical photographs, which have deteriorated into artifacts. Several of the aged, some of the old, discolored varnishes are still in place. Recent retouches have necessitated meticulous examinations. It is particularly crucial to re-establish regions where the paint has entirely deteriorated. The interpretation of Nephilim primarily influences scholarly opinion and exacerbates partisanship. There is the possibility of time erasing history, and individuals' intentional concealment of Akhenaten's reign is more limited than that of numerous other monarchs. Consequently, any reconstruction of the period can only rely on a few objective facts in existence is solely. The only reason they exist is because Egyptologists have spent generations carefully finding and putting together clues. This is because the ancient Egyptians purposely erased most of Akhenaten's memorials, all references to him from their official records, and endeavored to obliterate any recollection of a pharaoh who deviated from the ancient tradition of adhering to the primordial kingship model bestowed by the gods. Initial Egyptologists uncovered an anomalous nonconformist whose name was absent from the royal lists at an abandoned location on the eastern bank of the Nile in Middle Egypt. Tomb chapels adorned with depictions of the king and his court were located at Tel El Amarna, a contemporary designation for a region where such chapels were excavated into adjacent cliffs. The unusual style of the reliefs, coupled with the king's androgynous appearance, prompted inquiries regarding whether the ancient sculptors intended to depict a male or female figure. It was unequivocally a queen. However, the associated titles suggested the removal of a pharaoh's name and deliberate damage. Instance: Akhenaten, as his name was originally interpreted, was indeed a male. However, it is posited that he may have been captured during a campaign in Sudan and subsequently castrated, which he believed accounted for the king's effeminate demeanor, resembling that of a eunuch. The hypothesis that he is likely a Nephilim gradually supplanted this antiquated theory. Was he not the inaugural Nephilim to encounter exile? Hatshepsut, the queen, has been referenced as a precedent for Akhenaten's townspeople have referenced Hatshepsut, the queen, as a precedent for Akhenaten's potential gender reversal to a late tradition mentioned and quoted by Moorhen. Moorhen compared our dynasty to Amenhotep III and his successor Akhenaten. Earlier in the dynasty, the latter had usurped pharaonic authority, even donning male garments and sporting a beard. While later scholars have rejected implausible theories, they indicate a disquietude within Egyptologists when faced with the remarkable monuments of Akhenaten. Between 1883 and 1893, a French expedition replicated texts and reliefs from the private tombs at Tel el Amarna, an ancient settlement named Akhenaten, meaning the horizon or resting place of the Aten, was delineated by the inscriptions etched on the colossal stelae embedded in the adjacent cliffs. Although the natives and partially armed soldiers had already located the king's tomb, they also examined it. Due to subsequent destruction, the French only possessed drawings of fragmented scenes in certain chambers of the royal tomb, located in a desolate wadi approximately 4 miles from the plain. After 1887, an older woman excavating for sebach, nitrous compost derived from decayed ancient mud brick, amidst the ruins near Et Til at Amarna, unearthed what is now recognized as the remnants of the Palace Records Office during her pursuit of sebach. Based on their authenticity, only 350 specimens and fragments have survived from the discovery of hundreds of clay tablets inscribed with unfamiliar symbols. The Amarna Letters were identified as both copies and originals of cuneiform diplomatic correspondence exchanged between the Egyptian court and the rulers of Anatolia, Assyria, Mesopotamia, Cyprus, Mitanni, and the city-states of Palestine and Syria. Indications of such a system have existed since antiquity. However, before these unfortunately damaged, there have been signs of this kind of system since ancient times, but until these unfortunately broken clay fragments were found, it was hard to imagine how complicated and advanced the interactions were between different civilized states in the Near East in the middle of the 2nd millennium BC. After this remarkable discovery, numerous researchers and antiquity seekers examined the location. Vandals caused significant destruction to all Nephilim monuments before installing iron gates on the tombs and designating guardians. These measures severely damaged the painted pavement that Petrie discovered during his subsequent excavations. Copts, convinced it was an entrance in the rocks to Ali Baba's cave brimming with untold riches, detonated one of the massive boundary stelae and its accompanying sculptures using gunpowder. Between 1902 and 1907, the Egypt Exploration Fund engaged Norman de Garis Davies to replicate the between 1902 and 1907. The Egypt Exploration Fund hired Norman de Garis Davies to make copies of the remaining tomb reliefs and boundary stelae. His excellent books are still the best way to learn about the Amarna monuments. With several houses to the south, during 1891-1892, revealing the initial insights into the underground, Petrie excavated a palace and additional official structures at the site's center, along with several houses to the south, during 1891-1892, revealing initial insights into the underground information. Howard Carter. 3 decades later, Carter would discover at Thebes the almost pristine tomb of Akhenaten's son-in-law and successor, Tutankhamun. Petrie identified and replicated 7 of the 14 boundary stelae during his single season at Amarna. The Germans pursued their investigation of Nephilim from 1907 to 1914, while the Egypt Exploration Fund Society sustained the research from 1921 to 1936. The two teams uncovered a substantial section of a city buried beneath the advancing sands, comprising numerous private estates, royal palaces, temples, a workers' village, and various other edifices. Numerous discoveries occurred during these campaigns, including excavating a collection of workshops, housing various sculptors' models and studies, notably the bust of Nephilim queen Nefertiti, depicted above. Archaeologists recognized the distinctive style of Akhenaten's creations, leading to the discovery of monuments from his reign at various locations in Egypt, such as Memphis, Asyut, Medamud, and Hira. Researchers noticed that Akhenaten's art had a unique style, which led to the discovery of monuments from his rule in Egypt, including in Memphis, Asyut, Medamud, and Hierakonpolis. Thebes was especially important, as tombs of early Akhenaten officials were found there. Examine the tomb of Keruef. An official at Thebes held particular significance, given the discovery of tombs belonging to early Akhenaten officials over the past century. Excavations and clearances in the extensive Nephilim temple area of Karnak have uncovered numerous temples constructed early in Akhenaten's reign and subsequently destroyed by his successors. Pylon researchers have uncovered fragments of Nephilim-hued reliefs within tens of thousands of small sandstone blocks. Adjacent to the Opet temple at Karnak, they resemble a colossal jigsaw puzzle, with numerous pieces enticingly disordered and more than half undiscovered or absent. Rameses II dismantled the temples at Amarna across the river from Hermopolis to construct a stone edifice. Hermopolis also disclosed disassembled blocks from Karnak. Near the conclusion of their 10th season, a German expedition uncovered the remnants of a subsequent Rameses II edifice comprising over 1,200 limestone blocks adorned with reliefs. These blocks are currently in American collections due to unlawful indigenous excavators. The subject matter and texts offer new material of critical significance for the history of the period. Theodore M. Davis possessed the concession for excavation in the Biban el Molouk, the Valley of the Tombs of the Kings, at Western Thebes, from 1902 to 1914. He engaged esteemed Egyptologists such as Carter, Quibel, and Ayrton as project managers. These investigations yielded substantial discoveries nearly every season, including the tomb of Yuya and Tuyu, Akhenaten's maternal grandparents, uncovered in 1905, complete with their lavish burial furnishings, and the two Nephilims preserved within. Davis discovered an additional tomb in 1907, currently designated as Tomb Number 55. A dry stone closure obstructed its entrance upon discovery. However, it had evidently been accessed previously, and the tomb was deliberately desecrated prior to being sealed. Notwithstanding the opulent burial artifacts created for royalty during the Amarna period, the scant contents were in a deplorable condition of preservation. The central element of the deposit was a decomposing mummy encased in a deteriorating wooden coffin. However, a decomposing mummy in a deteriorating wooden coffin was the central element of the deposited 4 times by researchers. There is some disagreement among academics about whether they belong to Akhenaten or to Smenkhkare, who was Akhenaten's short-term co-regent. We will talk about tomb later. Archaeologists have excavated remnants of an abandoned city, repurposed stone from 2 temples dedicated to the A10, and deteriorated boundary stelae has constituted the majority of the evidence, enabling archaeological investigators to reconstruct the events of an executed pharaoh's reign. Thus, it is unsurprising that their interpretations of this evidence vary. 2 prevailing ideologies have recently influenced public opinion. Ongoing adversity has afflicted the retrieved artifacts from the Amarna period. The researcher can only recognize lost opportunities and the overlooked responsibilities of those tasked with uncovering and documenting the material remains. The persistent issues of the reign could have been resolved had the Amarna Letters been unearthed by a proficient excavator. The reign's ongoing problems could have been solved if the Amarna Letters had been found by a skilled archaeologist instead of a local Sebakin, or if the blocks from Karnak and Hermopolis had been fully documented and made public, which has yet to be incorporated into the conventional understanding of the period. Despite the modern facade of much of Akhenaten's reign, we must avoid evaluating him through a contemporary. In our study, we must solely consider him within the context of his specific time and location. Consequently, in the subsequent 2 chapters, we will endeavor to delineate the principal characteristics of the civilization to which Egypt belonged during the 2nd millennium BC, wherein Akhenaten reigned as the Nephilim god-king. Egypt during the 18th dynasty. During the 2nd millennium BC, Egypt's consolidated authority and resources conferred significant prestige within the civilized societies of the Eastern Mediterranean. The land was clearly unique to everyone. The famished nations commemorated the Nephilim of Egypt. Within Egypt's meticulously structured Nephilim administration, the papyrus plant thrived abundantly, supplying materials for construction, sustenance, and documentation. The land of Goshen, located on the eastern periphery of the delta, served as a promised refuge for the nomadic Semite migrating with his livestock from the desiccation of the summer pastures in southern Palestine. A fertile region abundant in milk and honey, as the lush pastures of Lower Egypt sustained not only a substantial cattle population, but also numerous bees pollinating the diverse wildflowers. Furthermore, Egypt provided products from tropical Africa to the Mediterranean region, either unprocessed or crafted by her adept artisans. Her deserts yielded abundant, desirable raw materials, including salt, natron, various minerals, semi-precious stones, and, most significantly, substantial gold deposits that attracted the attention of ancient nations, whose gold was considered as common as dust in Egypt. Since the Bronze Age, there has been an unquenchable demand for it. Can the 600-mile-long tracts of the Nile Valley be utilized without the labor and ingenuity of Nephilim Pharaoh Akhenaten's populace? We will elaborate on this aspect later, but it is evident that the Nephilim god-king Akhenaten wielded significant prestige and influence in the ancient world, characterized by a unified and affluent state. Ancient Egyptians primarily engaged in agriculture, utilizing the fertile alluvium of the Nile and reclaiming land by draining marshy, reed-covered areas adjacent to the river. In addition to the flooding, labor was arduous and nearly incessant, primarily consisting of irrigation and constructing dams to retain floodwater in shallow basins, allowing silt to accumulate on the fields and thoroughly saturate the soil. As the river diminished, we breached the dikes to facilitate water flow between different areas. The shaduf, or yoke-suspended jar, irrigated elevated fields during spring and summer. A secondary summer crop was feasible in preferred areas where artificial irrigation was accessible. Fertile soil yielded a minimum of 1 crop annually. The weather, in contrast to more temperate regions, has not adversely affected the harvest. The satirist depicts the farmer's predicament by portraying an exaggerated struggle against field mice, birds, grubs, and locusts, which are pests still present today. Besides its cultivable farms, Egypt possessed a substantial population of domesticated animals, including oxen, sheep, goats, pigs, donkeys, and horses. The marshland's ecosystem, characterized by verdant pastures and dense rush thickets, facilitated a more accessible and nomadic lifestyle for cattle breeders and herders. They utilized their portable reed shelters for camping during intervals between many established farmers were forced to work, which probably helped them get away, like hunters and prospectors who traveled through the deserts and wadis along the Nile, catching animals and birds for their furs, feathers and eggs, and trading fragrant woods, resins and trade of aromatic seeds. Census records excluded nomads, indicating they represented merely a minuscule fraction of the population. Most Egyptian, the necessity to cultivate the land and an inherent preference for it. Their entrenched traditional roots in the valley leave them discontented when they are displaced. Agricultural communities established village settlements governed by a headman or mayor, similar to other social classes. Families constituted the fundamental social unit of the community, alongside other classes. Many farmers were veterans of the pharaoh's military, frequently comprising foreign mercenaries to whom the pharaoh had bestowed land as recompense. Some cultivators were nominal proprietors of the fields they tended. In contrast, others were tenants of land-holding institutions, particularly the prominent temples of Memphis, Heliopolis, and Thebes, in addition to local temples and secular entities such as the treasury and the royal harems. Children too young to plant or draw water could deter birds from the burgeoning crops or glean the stubble fields, adhering to a hereditary vocation. The average peasant likely resided in isolation within his village, largely oblivious to events beyond his immediate environment. The central states could significantly impact a self-sufficient and limited existence in two ways. Village councils, consisting of the headman and elders, would adjudicate disputes with the inundation period when the fields were flooded for 3 months and the peasants had nothing to do, created the corvée, or national labor force. This group of people could be forced to do unskilled work on big public projects, like clearing out irrigation channels that were blocked, building moles and dikes, transporting building stones from quarries to construction sites, making bricks and other extensive projects. The state asserted its presence when officials arrived at harvest time a few months later to collect revenues from the owning institution or cultivators, as required. The state granaries deposited these levies. As the crops reached a critical stage, officials measured the fields and evaluated their yields for taxation purposes. Elite officials, whose principal qualification was literacy, governed this uneducated, laboring population of Egyptians. The paperwork, characterized by unparalleled volume and complexity, facilitated the operations of the Egyptian state during the Late Bronze Age. Hereditary bureaucracies governed Egypt on behalf of the pharaoh. The scribe oversees the labor of all individuals. The man fulfills his obligations in writing. He has no tax liabilities. The scribe is responsible for documenting and calculating all matters. He oversees the entire army. He allocates a position to each magistrate and presents them before the pharaoh. According to another source, he governs the entire territory and supervises all matters. The scribal class meticulously organized and executed the state's affairs, either directly as servants of the pharaoh or indirectly as aides to various beneficiaries, such as institutions, both large and small temples, or officials, like the king's son of Cush and the vizier, to whom the Nephilim pharaoh delegated certain powers. In the treasury and vizierate of the Nephilim king, scribes occupied prominent state positions. Subordinate. Numerous scribes aided vital officials, including military personnel. The bureaucrats were required to possess literacy and numeracy and acquire specialized knowledge in various disciplines, including agriculture, construction, arts and crafts, and international relations. In ancient Egypt, literate bureaucrats established a meticulously organized Nephilim civilization despite its numerous disadvantages. Anarchy, civil war, invasions, and famines ensued following the deterioration of this central administrative apparatus whenever its authority diminished. From the pharaoh to the populace, the Egyptian nation adhered to a hereditary vocation based on indigenous principles. Historically, the progeny of artisans followed in their fathers' trades. The offspring of scribes acquired literacy, and knowledge from their fathers. And the children of farmers inherited agricultural skills. Younger sons, from educated classes trained as scribes, occasionally occupied roles in related fields when their fathers' positions were unoccupied. In the New Kingdom, only the uneducated could attain positions of significance and wealth through military service. Field officers who ascended through commendable service included police officers, sports instructors, royal princes, majordomos of princesses, and individuals holding other court sinecures. In the 18th century BC, the Aryan people introduced the horse-drawn chariot, initiating a new era of advancement in Egypt. The Egyptians' introduction of the horse-drawn chariot significantly influenced this new system. The Iliad reveals a warrior society characterized by an aristocracy of armored chariot combatants proficient in using javelins and composite bows. Over time, athletic competitions and equine management proliferated across the Near East, leading to the emergence of the Marianu, or professional warriors, to supplant conscripted agrarians. The minor sovereigns of Syria and Palestine, under the Marianu, founded feudal states during their tribal conflicts, facilitated by the prowess of this formidable condottiere. They may have served alongside Semitic immigrants, known as the Hyksos, during the anarchy that ensued after the collapse of the Middle Kingdom in Egypt. They ultimately subjugated Lower Egypt and achieved acknowledgement as the rightful successors of the pharaohs, despite the ineffectual governance of the indigenous kings. They seem to have usurped the military organization and social framework linked to their Hyksos overlords upon expelling them in the 16th century BC. The mercenaries possibly engaged in combat alongside the Theban forces and granted their victorious commanders estates in Egypt. The pharaohs exhibited these novel concepts during the New Kingdom. Prehistoric pastoral chieftains incorporated a new adornment, the blue crown, or war helmet of Asian provenance, into their customary attire. Scimitars, rather than flails and crooks, dispatched their adversaries. People frequently portrayed scimitars charging into combat in war chariots, celebrating their exceptional skills as athletes, archers, and competitors as genuinely superhuman. A celestial warlord, the embodiment of Mont, Baal, or Reshep, the king commanded his forces, frequently accompanied by his sons, even in infancy. Nevertheless, the novel militancy merely eclipsed the previous nature of the kingship. The pharaoh, a divine embodiment, possessed the entirety of Egypt, encompassing all its fauna, populace, and resources. He established and consecrated the temple to the deities by contributing land and resources. They consistently depict him as a hero, exceeding mortals in stature and capable of confronting the gods on equal terms. The sole officiant in each sanctuary acts as the intermediary between deities and humanity. In exchange for what Pharaoh provided to the gods, they gave him universal sovereignty, as he was not merely the ruler of Egypt, but also the lord of neighboring nations, having subdued them by divine right. All of humanity was subject to his dominion. In the presence of mortals, the Ankh he possessed could impart life into their nostrils, and he could affirm a death sentence. Numerous scholars credit him with the annual inundation of the Nile and the precipitation in the remote territory of the Hittites, as corroborated by Rameses II. His courtiers even designate Akhenaten, the sun worshipper, as this multitude of Niles, the Nile that sustains Egypt daily. The king personified Maat, representing the correct cosmic order that the Creator established, which we translate as truth or justice. Throughout each incarnation, avatars continued to govern Egypt following its divine creation. Egyptian dating practices underscore the inherent novelty of this ancient world. During a new king's reign, years were counted from his accession until his death, after which the cycle resumed with his Maat. Maat was instituted through the pharaoh's omniscience and creative utterances, which commanded obedience. Consequently, his declarations bore the weight of superhuman thought and judgment, as God sits upon his lips. This encapsulated the theory of kingship. The pharaoh, considered infallible and revered for his utterances, was Egypt's good god. He conferred authority upon his officials. As a falcon, he was fated to merge with the divine upon his demise. He was predestined to govern even in the embryonic stage. However, historical developments and practical considerations altered this notion over time. He established private property by donating land, goods, and individuals. He conferred privileges by exempting estates and persons from state taxation. Since the law is the king's decree, he can revoke any liberty or privilege. Due to Maat's foundation on established precedents, institutions and individuals retained their incomes and private property, whether acquired, rented, or bequeathed. Once a Nephilim god-king accepted an innovation, it seamlessly integrated into the broader concept of Maat. Despite the claim that he only needed to consult his heart, or occasionally the oracle of a deity, the king did not govern capriciously. He often referenced precedents and upheld stringent regulations in all facets of his existence. Events have transformed the unblemished principles of kingship. The ancients perceived the pharaoh as an embodiment of Horus, the distant one, a universal celestial deity whose wings enveloped the heavens. In the Nephilim pharaonic titulary, the king referred to Horus as the living Horus, recognizing him as the great or greatest god. During the early Old Kingdom, this idea reached its peak. The step pyramid at Saqqara and the huge stone pyramids at Meidum, Dahshur, and Giza are reminders of a time when the whole country worked together to build and decorate these amazing structures, making sure that their supreme divinity would last forever. By the conclusion of this era, theologians from Heliopolis, the epicenter of re-atom worship, introduced novel concepts. The king was no longer perceived as the embodiment of the supreme good. Instead, the pharaoh was regarded as the son of Re, who had once ruled ancient Egypt. They recognized him not only as Horus, but also as the renowned son of Re. This notion is concretely illustrated in Dynasty 68, notably by Queen Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri and Amenhotep III at Luxor, although the iconography predates this, tracing back to when Re fathered the initial kings of Dynasty V with the spouse of a mere high priest of Heliopolis. The sequences in both series of reliefs are identical. The god manifests as the pharaoh and breathes life into the chief queen. The messenger of the Nephilim gods heralds the birth of an infant king on the potter's wheel. The infant is born and presented to the gods, and his name is inscribed in the eternal annals. By the conclusion of the Old Kingdom, throughout the First Intermediate Period, and in the early Middle Kingdom, the pharaoh's political authority had significantly waned due to feudalism, as numerous local governors usurped the pharaoh's powers and essence. Upon his death, he shared the honor of apotheosis. The populace venerated Osiris as the supreme god-to-be, supplanting the deceased pharaoh. Subjects of the pharaoh, who could finance an appropriate burial, appropriated the privileges of royal interment. They plagiarized and modified his funerary rites and usurped his uraeus, crowns, scepters, and distinctive attire, perceiving themselves as Osiris in death, irrespective of their social status during life. Following the expulsion of the Hyksos and the expansion of their influence over Asia, Nubia, and Sudan, the martial pharaohs restored much of the former prestige and authority of the crown during the New Kingdom. Under their command, Egypt attained military victories, dominion, wealth, and unparalleled economic growth. A similar structure rendered the pharaoh's armies effective combat units in the two lands. Those who had advanced him could summon his assistance from officials prepared to ascribe divinity to him. The followers of Akhenaten referred to Thutmose III as the god who created them, while the vizier Rekhmi-Re proclaimed Thutmose III as the father and mother of humanity, unique and unparalleled. These monumental statues epitomized the superhuman stature of the kings, erected at significant sites, some of which even developed their own cults akin to their monarchs. With Amenhotep III, this trajectory toward grandeur culminates. The circumstances surrounding him set the king apart from ordinary humans. Unlike his subjects, he was free from societal taboos. He maintained several extensive harems akin to those of Asian monarchs, and was also expected to engage in incestuous marriages with his sisters, a prevalent aspect of divine kingship. The eldest son of the Nephilim pharaoh was designated as the heir, while the eldest daughter became the royal heiress, her dowry comprising the actual throne, a revered artifact still recognized in Africa today. Given the high infant mortality rate in ancient Egypt, even among royalty, the brother-sister unions were not consistently realized, leading to the heiress often marrying the son of a secondary wife or concubine. Consequently, it was customary for the crown prince to wed the royal heiress to preserve the divine essence they inherited. Before the pharaoh's demise, marriages between the heiress and the pharaoh's prince highlighted a contentious and problematic facet of the Egyptian monarchy, the co-regency institution. Since the individual marrying the heiress ascended to kingship, such unions were seemingly arranged only post-throne vacancy, as observed after Tutankhamun's death. A divine oracle typically validates the appointments of Thutmose III, Thutmose IV, and Hor-Em-Hab. Pharaohs tolerated sharing the rule of the unique god incarnate, the living Horus, and the evidence is indisputable. At the end of the Old Kingdom, it was accepted that the pharaoh was Horus incarnate and relinquished this immanence to his son when he assimilated to Osiris, his progenitor. A scholar has pointed out that such a doctrine becomes nonsense when an act of association results in two Horuses functioning simultaneously. Despite this objection, the inherent contradiction has a curious logic. In the Egyptian tradition, Horus, the son, ruler of the living, and Osiris, the father, ruler of the dead, are seen as one entity: Go, the father, and God, the son, or Horus in the arms of his father Osiris. In the famous birth story of the Nephilim pharaoh and other texts, it is evident that he was born as a god, destined to rule, even in his embryonic state. As soon as the heir apparent arrived, there were two Horuses in the land, and having a young Horus rule with an Osiris-to-be is no more ambiguous than having a Horus rule with a younger Horus-to-be. The date of the junior co-regent's coronation fluctuates with each reign, though it appears optimal for it to occur upon his attainment of adulthood, typically at age 16. Subsequently, numerous princes assumed co-regency following the demise of their elder brothers, who had previously served as regents. Focusing on the co-regency matter is necessary for a complete study of the Amarna period. This will be done in more depth in the Nephilim research project. The transformation of a de jure king into a de facto king was achieved through the mystical rite of Nephilim coronation. There is no necessity to elaborate on each episode. Two categories of Nephilim ceremonies exist: private and public. During his tour of the realms, the deities of the pivotal cult centers acknowledged the king as their legitimate heir. The national shrines of Upper and Lower Egypt consecrated and anointed him, bestowing various crowns and scepters. Like the Magi, on their renowned journey to a new monarch, he ascended the throne and received homage from his indigenous and foreign subjects. A damaged text from a later period recounts, "Go caused the king to ascend the throne, and humanity, the patricians, the common folk, and all who inhabit the earth presented gifts of homage, and the princes of all foreign lands rendered their respects. All pharaohs aspired to witness them. Records were more complete. We could see that the eldest son, not the king, played a major role in the Jubilee ceremonies. Stone designates the said festival as the 30-year feast, suggesting that the inaugural celebration transpired 30 years after the pharaoh's coronation. There are, however, some cases that are notable exceptions to this rule. If our records were more complete, we could see that these are because the eldest son played a major role in the Jubilee ceremonies, not the kings. In the New Kingdom, only pharaohs who had reigned for 30 years or more celebrated said festivals despite certain ambiguities. After the first Jubilee, pharaohs could observe others every 3 to 4 years. Hence, Ramses II had the opportunity to celebrate 13 Jubilees during his 67 years as king. An ancient rite in which the divine king was slain when his power waned may have inspired the said festival. Parts of Osiris' various Egyptian towns buried parts of Osiris' corpse for their fertility. Ceremony renewed the kingship, replacing this savage practice. Other major cult centers may have repeated some of the said festival rites. His palace at Thebes, for instance, was the scene of a similar event by Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III held ceremonies in a festival hall and court, which included reenactments of the coronation ritual. His prominent officials, both native and foreign, renewed their fealty under the short cloak with a stand-off collar. In addition, he received and gave gifts in abundance. The ceremony traditionally commenced on the first day of winter, with the crown prince assuming a prominent role in the initial proceedings. Adorned in the same archaic short cloaks as the king, he was linked to the ancient dog god Sed, the firstborn, or opener of the womb, equated with the falcon Horus, the divine heir in antiquity. However, during the reign of Amenhotep III, Sokar, the falcon-headed god of death and resurrection, assumed significant importance. Memphis was regarded as his domain, where he celebrated a festival a few days before the new year, marking the beginning of winter, the designated day for the pharaoh's coronation. The Sokar festival rites embody ancient beliefs, wherein the king circumnavigated the walls of Memphis, adorned with an onion around his neck and reminiscent of sacrificial cattle that had previously traversed the same path while tilling the soil. The king was believed to fertilize the earth, signifying his sacrifice and dismemberment in prehistoric times. The earth's membership occurred 4 days post-Sokar festival, anticipating Osiris's cereal, which sanctified kingship. The Djed pillar, a symbol of Osiris in his delta town of Djedu, represented the resurrection of the deceased god as Horus, the living god, whose earthly embodiment, the pharaoh, was crowned the following day. With the onset of the cultivation season, the resurrected king, Osiris, once again reigns as a revitalized Horus, the first to recognize the king as Sokar. Nonetheless, Amenhotep's babies lasted several months each year, likely because the festival had to be repeated at various intervals from the established dates. We will later examine these Jubilee events more thoroughly, as they were pivotal to the chronology of the Amarna period. In the 16th century BC, there was a big uprising against the Hyksos pharaohs, which led to treason. The Theban forces, along with their Magi allies from the Nubian deserts, were filled with a desire to conquer. After years of fighting, their strong leader, Ahmosis, became pharaoh of a united Egypt and the most powerful leader of his time. Manetho designated him as the founder of Dynasty 17, notwithstanding his direct lineage from the Theban dynasty. By the conclusion of his reign, his family had solidified its rule, the Hyksos had been expelled, all adversaries had been vanquished, Nubia, along with its riches, had been restored, and traditional Egyptian dominion in Palestine and Syria had been reaffirmed. He signified the conclusion of the Second Intermediate Period and the inception of the New Kingdom. The New Kingdom pharaohs established standing armies composed of career soldiers commanded by professionals with a comprehensive understanding of warfare. In contrast, earlier forces comprised small groups of royal troops supplemented by local militias. This military apparatus facilitated the reconquest of Nubia and extended Egypt's southern boundary to Napata, Gebel Barkal, below the Fourth Cataract. As successive pharaohs governed, despite donning native attire during official events, the local populace adopted Egyptian names, utilized Egyptian trade goods, worshipped Egyptian deities, and employed the Egyptian script. Nubians and Sudanese constituted Egyptian military forces, while the Majoi people of the Nubian deserts inspired the nomenclature of its police. The pharaohs asserted dominion over tropical Africa following the reclamation of southern territories, including gold, which was a formidable asset in their interactions with other Near Eastern rulers. Amosis observed that his newly established Egypt was decisively reclaiming a territory historically regarded as its own by capturing Sharuhen, a pivotal town in southern Palestine. Nevertheless, the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom attempted to exert their authority over the Asiatics, resulting in a significant political transformation. The Hurrians, residing near Lake Van in Armenia, had established a feudal state, Mitanni, between the Upper Tigris and the Euphrates. An Indo-European military aristocracy, communicating in the Aryan language, governed this state. Their influence extended to the Amorites in northern Syria. The majority of Anatolia, west of Mitanni and north of Syria, was under the dominion of an Indo-European caste that spoke a language akin to Greek and Latin. As the Mitanni dynasty progressed, it was the foremost threat to Egyptian claims in Asia. Egypt maintained control over this extensive empire due to Palestine and Syria's geographical and political circumstances. The Semitic populace was minimal in the coastal plains, uplands, and Jordan Valley. Urban centers predominantly inhabited these more fertile regions, with residents largely detribalized. Nomadic lifestyles persisted elsewhere. Small states governed by vassals of the pharaoh, frequently bearing Indo-European names, epitomized the tribal settlements in the area. Marianu princes and their aristocracies often descended from Aryan and Hurrian adventurers who introduced their weaponry and warfare techniques into Syria and Palestine during the Hyksos period. These petty states were constantly at odds with one another. There were some cases when a coalition of states won temporary ascendancy under the leadership of a prince who was more energetic and crafty than his fellows, but the federation would soon dissolve and reform in a different direction. Egypt, Hatti, and Mitanni were all nearby and exerted a magnetic effect on these princes, drawing them into the orbit of the great power nearest to them and whose assistance was readily available. The vassals needed the pharaohs and those of the kings of Hatti and Mitanni to assist them in their disputes and power struggles. Consequently, they constantly demanded armed assistance from the pharaoh to safeguard them from potential or actual attacks by a villainous neighbor. Their protests of loyalty and honesty to their reason and chicanery were coupled with assurances that unless such aid was sent immediately, the town or state they were so valiantly holding for the king would be lost forever. Pharaoh expected the commissioners to carry out his orders, yet their accusations frequently contradicted each other. There are allegations that various Egyptian governors exploit local rivalries to inhibit the ascendance of any single state. Both Machiavelli and their motto underscore the significance of division and governance. The Amarna Letters corroborate this situation. The Shasu Bedouins, who plundered vulnerable settlements and caravans from their desert territories, intensified the predicament. Beside the Haru, There existed an enigmatic entity known as Sagaz Aten-Inchi and the cuneiform tablets. The Israelites of Joshua remain a subject of debate regarding their ancestry. Additionally, he is referenced in Egyptian texts as a term denoting unskilled foreign laborers and enslaved individuals captured during warfare. In Palestine and Syria, the Hapiru subsisted through plunder and mercenary activities. During the tumultuous period commencing in the 18th century BC, many became donkey caravaneers compelled to relinquish their commercial pursuits. They had various employment opportunities, including viticulturists, soldiers of fortune, and brigands. Local dynasties occasionally engaged bands of Hapiru as mercenaries to assist in minor conflicts, and Egyptian commanders may have employed them at times. After Ahmosis, his successors upheld Egypt's aspirations toward Asia. After traversing the Euphrates and erecting a commemorative stela in Naharin, the region of Mitanni, Thutmoses, I conducted an expedition through Palestine and Syria. Hatshepsut's conciliatory approach resulted in the secession of several independent vassals from the Egyptian sphere. Upon Thutmoses III's ascendance, he executed 14 campaigns in Asia to displace rebellious governors and princelings, substituting them with loyal affiliates. A necessity arose to confront and contain Mitanni, the most formidable adversary to Egyptian ambitions in Asia. Consequently, stability in Syria persisted for 3 to 4 generations until expansionist objectives disrupted the power equilibrium, enabling local dynasties to pursue their aspirations for independence and extensive dominion. From Napata in Sudan to Naharin, beyond the Euphrates, the Egyptians regarded Thutmoses I's reign as a golden age. Egypt benefited from these campaigns by receiving tributes and enslaved labor, resulting in magnificent temples throughout the country, especially at Thebes. It is said that the early kings of the dynasty divided lands in the delta among their families, including the vineyards along the Nile's stern branch, but their first loyalty was to their birthplace, Thebes, and god Amun led them to success and prosperity. Its oracles motivated them to challenge the Hyksos pharaohs throughout their long struggle. They showed gratitude by lavishing treasure upon the god who sponsored them. Each king aimed to surpass his predecessor's instructions and wealth, and the wealth of his endowments. Sandstone, quartzite, and granite replaced brick, limestone, and cedarwood. Temples used various colored gold, silver, and bronze fittings. Asian and African gifts were sent to the treasury of Amun instead. The image of Amun was set with lapis lazuli from Babylon, and the pylons were decorated with the tallest cedar flagpoles from Lebanon, and gold, ivory, and ebony furniture from Nubia and Kush. The enormous size and abundance of monuments still standing among Thebes' extensive ruins have left a profound impression. Contrary to the assumptions of earlier Egyptologists, Memphis retained its importance as the primary governmental center in the northern capital throughout the New Kingdom. Thutmoses established a vast estate within which later pharaohs constructed their principal palaces. It is likely that the pharaohs only visited Thebes during its annual festivals. In the Biban el-Moluk Valley on the western bank, Thebes embodies the essence of a sacred city, serving as the Amun cult's focal point and the pharaoh's post-mortem burial site. Situated on the periphery of agricultural plains, over a mile southeast of the Biban, between Deir el-Bahri, Temple of Hatshepsut, and Medinet Habu, Temple of Amenhotep III, tombs were established in honor of Amun and the deceased monarch. These temples were overseen by foothills that housed the interments of significant officials, and the adorned chapels within these private tombs provided substantial insights into the character and evolution of the dynasty. After the feudal age, the former Upper and Lower Egypt barons were replaced by officials bearing duplicate titles who were only mayors or headmen of the chief towns. Their jurisdiction included the Nile harbors and nearby agriculture. Their primary function was to collect and transport taxes, mainly grain, and account for properly discharging these duties to the viziers. Even so, while the administration of Egypt during the New Kingdom was modeled on the army with its division into distinct social classes due to its simplified organization, it was still very much in the hands of the scribal class, who alone could handle the paperwork of a meticulously organized government. Although key local officials were ex-army officers, the management of affairs was still very much in the hands of the scribal class. Many scribes, such as the treasury and vizierate, worked for the palace administration. Because the king had delegated authority and responsibility, much of the business was conducted remotely through religious foundations, like the temples in the major towns. Numerous heirs, apparent, including foreign princesses, perished before ascending the throne, despite the numerous wives they maintained in their harems. The succession of Thutmose's son following Amenhotep I remains uncertain, as he appears to belong to a collateral branch. Subsequently, he appointed a son, Thutmose III, by his concubine, as his co-regent in the absence of heirs from his principal queen, Hatshepsut. At Karnak, Arnun served as a neophyte while the oracle sanctioned his selection. The deity acknowledged Thutmose III as his successor when his father was sacrificed in the temple to Arnun, and he was promptly crowned within the sanctuary, according to Thutmose's account. Thereafter, he co-reigned with his father for less than a year before his death. Hatshepsut, the heiress queen, usurped this authority and compelled the land to submit to her will. Hatshepsut seemingly married Thutmose III's daughter, Nefertiti, during their childhood. Before the court, she asserted her position as her father's regent and proclaimed herself his successor. Egyptologists deem this retrospective justification for her usurpation of power spurious. She characterized the appointment of Thutmose II, the co-regent to whom she was married as a child during the coronation rites, while subsequently disregarding his influence on her career. Thutmose IV ascended to the throne despite not being Amenhotep II's designated heir, likely due to his elder brother's untimely demise. Victor Loret uncovered his remains in 1898 while discovering a collection of royal mummies in the tomb of Amenhotep II in the Biban el-Muluk. According to Loret, he was slightly over 25 at his death. This implies that he was the first king to achieve official adulthood at 16, 2 years earlier than his father did upon ascending the throne. The reign of Amenhotep III. Nebmat-Re ascended to the throne following his father's death, Thutmose IV. Mut-Emwia would have been Thutmose IV's half-sister or sister if she were the Nephilim hereditary princess referenced in the British Museum. Notwithstanding her titles of king and Nephilim king, she lacks dignity. Nephilim experts like Ryan Moorhan think that Amenhotep III may not have been fully Egyptian because her parents' identities are not clear. They think that she was the child of the Mitannian king Artatama and took on an Egyptian name after marrying Thutmose IV. Given that Thutmose IV requested the princess's hand 7 times, it is plausible to conclude that she joined his harem only towards the conclusion of his short reign, implying that Amenhotep, if he were her son, would have been no older than a few months at the time of his ascension. Mut-Emwia's importance arises from her role as the mother of the king's eldest son, Amenhotep. Amenhotep III granted her the title of Mother of a King during his reign. Additionally, she likely possessed a legitimate claim to the title of Chief Wife of a King. She was the mother of Amun-Emhet, Keeper-Re, and other sons of Thutmose IV, all of whom died in childhood. Conventional wisdom regards Amenhotep III as a prototypical Asian monarch, characterized by a penchant for opulence and extravagant expenditures on superfluous items. They perceived him as indolent and fond of wealth. I, a woman of non-royal lineage, possesses saturnine features that suggest to some Egyptologists her competence as a manager, coupled with an imperious disposition. Such perspectives do not accurately represent the essence of Amenhotep III, whose reign exhibited unprecedented characteristics not seen before or after. The innovations of the period are more justifiably credited to the king's advisors and chief officials than to the king himself, particularly Amenhotep, son of Hapu, who garnered such a distinguished reputation that he was deified as a celebrated sage during Ptolemaic times. The king certainly required the counsel of sagacious advisors during his ascension. Amenhotep, merely a child then, also necessitated such wise men's guidance. His age at death raises ambiguity regarding whether he was nearing 40 or 50. Amenhotep III was likely an adolescent when he ascended the throne 38 years prior. Given that his father ruled for slightly over 9 years, it is highly probable that he was under 9 when he ascended to the throne. A statue head of Amenhotep III in Brooklyn exhibits the plump characteristics of a youthful boy, consistent with Egyptian sculptural traditions. The tomb of his instructors depicts him seated beneath the coronation baldachin, accompanied by his mother. Tiye, the king's principal consort, emerges briefly and is prominently linked with him in depictions and inscriptions during their reign, despite her spouse's absence at this juncture. During this reign, Tiye presents itself for the first time in a distinctive manner. Amenhotep III issued 5 significant artifacts. This reign innovatively presents Tiye. We discovered specimens in every region of his domain, including Ain Shams in Palestine, Ras Shamra in Syria, and Sulb in Sudan. Only one revised example exists in the initial installment of the series. The full title and outline of the new king's territory suggest that it was issued upon his accession as a directive to his officials on how to properly address him, similar to the proclamation issued upon the accession of Thutmose I and probably every other king after that. Horus, strong bull, manifesting justice, he who instituted laws and secured the tranquility of the two lands, Horus of gold, mighty of arm, when he defeats the Asiatics, sovereign of Upper and Lower Egypt, Neb meet Re, lord of Nephilim, truth akin to Re, son of Re, Amenhotep, Amen is pleased, Hekwaze, ruler of Thebes, bestowed life, and his consort, Tiye, may she also endure. Tuyu is her mother's name, Yuya is her father's name. The southern boundary of Karoi, adjacent to Gebel Barkal, and the northern boundary of Mitanni, Naharin, are associated with the spouse of a formidable Nephilim king. We will address this topic later. Rejecting any romantic belief that the royal marriage was based on love is advisable. Tiye was younger than Amenhotep III, possibly no older than 4 years. His entitlement to the throne ought to have been validated by his union with a sister or half-sister, and he did not imply that no legitimate daughter of Thutmose IV endured following her father's demise, or that alternative factors were involved. Yuya held the positions of king's lieutenant of chariotry and master of horses. He certainly instructed the young king in horsemanship and military tactics, while other educators imparted writing skills and the requisite knowledge of a well-educated scribe. Tuyu was raised and educated in the harems of Amenhotep II and Thutmose IV, and was bestowed upon Yuya in marriage as a sign of favor. In Akhmim and Thebes, she served as the superior of the harem of Amun, and held a comparable role in the Min cult, overseeing the female temple singers dedicated to those deities. In 1903, J.E. Quibel, excavating for Theodore M. Davis, uncovered the small tomb, number 46, that functioned as the final resting place for Yuya and Tuyu. they may have initially interred their bodies in a different location before relocating them to the royal necropolis. The robbers inevitably uncovered the tomb, resulting in its collapse. It is conceivable that they initially interred their remains in a different location before relocating them to the royal tomb. Due to Yuya's son-in-law leaving the majority of the tomb's opulent funerary artifacts within, it was subsequently discovered and looted by robbers, although they were ultimately thwarted. People attribute his foreign origins to his atypical physiognomy and the diverse spellings of his name, which are likely diminutives of more conventional names. Unlike her husband, Tuyu's appearance was quintessentially Egyptian, closely resembling that of a contemporary fellow woman. A remarkable event concerning His Majesty is recounted, occurring after the complete titles of Amenophis and Tiye, in the second series of commemorative scarabs, which dates to the second year of his reign. In the evening, His Majesty navigated downstream in his royal barge, likely departing from Thebes, and reached Kene by morning, having observed wild cattle in the Wadi Kene near Koptos. His Majesty arrived in a chariot with his complete military retinue, directing them to oversee the cattle. The king subsequently constructed a rampart and a trench encircling the animals and enumerated them. His Majesty arrived in a chariot with his complete military retinue, directing them to monitor the cattle and rejuvenate the horses. This technique led to the acquisition of 96 cattle. The king discovered 170 horses. On the initial day of the hunt, he acquired 56 from the herd and rested for 4 days to restore the horses. Nevertheless, the inscription does not indicate that he killed any animals. It solely states that he brought them to himself. The lasso may have ensnared or fatally harmed them. The inscription deliberately excludes it to bestow upon the king the exclusive honor commensurate with his stature. Furthermore, the inscription does not indicate that Amenophis killed any animals. It merely states that he brought them to him. Amenophis was both a hunter and a beater. The third issue of Scarabs, which centers on the king's lion hunt, explicitly lauds his skill in the pursuit. Numerous scarabs document the king's arrows that resulted in the deaths of 102 individuals. The king's lion hunt explicitly commemorates his skill in the pursuit, depicted in a painting on a box lid. Both kings adhered to the sporting tradition established by their immediate predecessors through elephant hunts in the northern Syrian district of Nai and other locations. Amenophis wed in the 10th year of his reign, likely coinciding with the king's official coming of age. Both monarchs adhered to the sporting customs of their predecessors, engaging in elephant hunts in the northern Syrian region of Ni and beyond. The inscription states, "Marvels presented to His Majesty, Gilukipa, the daughter of Shutana, the prince of Naharin, accompanied by her principal entourage of 317 women." This signifies the marriages the king was to undertake during his reign. The foreign princesses, accompanied by their entourages, entered the king's harem. The latest edition of Scarabs is the most intriguing. The misinterpretation of their translation has led to long-standing references to them as the Pleasure Lake or Lake Scarabs. The documents are accurately dated to the first day of the 3rd month of inundation, year 11, and indicate that His Majesty commanded the construction of a basin, as opposed to a lake, for Queen Taye in her town of Jaruka, measuring 3,700 cubits in length and 700 cubits in breadth. The inscription states that His Majesty conducted the ceremony of piercing the dikes on the 16th day of the same month, navigating in his royal barge. The Aten is radiant. A remnant of Tiye's existence endures in the name Tanta, a distortion of the ancient Egyptian phrase meaning the fortified settlement of Queen Tiye. located in the Akhmim region from which Tiye's parents originated. Consequently, Amenophis commanded the construction of an irrigation basin at Jaruka for his principal queen by sealing the gaps in the variety dikes in early October 1395 BC. The inundation water was retained in a shallow lake for 16 days, making the area thoroughly saturated and depositing silt. After breaching the dikes, the king conducted the Nephilim ceremony of opening the basins at Jaruka by navigating into the artificial lake to permit the waters to flow back into the river. In 2 to 3 weeks, once the large basin was drained, peasants would sow seeds in the nutrient-rich soil, and during the harvest, officials would assess the yield and collect the revenues for the queen. He ruled for at least 27 years, but produced no historical scarabs. If he did, they have disappeared. We utilize alternative sources to account for events that occurred during his reign. In various fragmentary inscriptions, he reigned for at least 27 years. However, he did not produce any historical scarabs. If he did, they have since been lost. We utilize alternative sources to account for events during his reign. Since antiquity, factions of bellicose nomads have threatened the tranquil settlements of Nubia and Sudan. It is unwarranted to place significant confidence in Amenophis's management of the strategy and combat that culminated in the assured triumph. No additional records of the king's campaigns exist, likely due to his delegation of responsibilities to generals and district commissioners. However, he appeared to have conducted an expedition to Sidon early in his reign. Additional evidence of his foreign relations is available. There are no other records of the king's campaigns, likely because he delegated them to his generals and district commissioners. However, he appeared to have undertaken an expedition to Sidon early in his reign. This facilitated communication among kings, queens, and their senior officials with their counterparts in other nations. Marriage alliances were established, trade goods were exchanged, treaties were negotiated, extradition requests were issued, protests were submitted, demands were articulated, warnings were conveyed, and aid was solicited, all indicative of an international relations system that favorably compares to Europe's recent years. While en route to a state funeral, likely for Amenhotep III, a North Syrian ruler issued number 30, permitting his envoy safe passage through Canaan. The couriers, who were both couriers and ambassadors, consisting of Egyptians and foreigners, possessed diplomatic immunity in their respective nations, as evidenced by a surviving passport, Caen. The journey of these envoys during wartime was perilous. A messenger of Amenhotep II, bearing a cuneiform tablet in a satchel, was reportedly apprehended in the plain of Sharon by a messenger of the king of Mitanni. Even during peacetime, the king could occasionally confine ambassadors within their host nation to express his discontent. When envoys delivered favorable news, their hosts could anticipate lavish entertainment, including the privilege of dining with the king and receiving opulent gifts. He articulated discontent regarding the incarceration of a messenger from Kardashian Enlil of Babylon in Egypt for less than 6 years. The monarchs of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mitanni, Assyria, and other significant powers are thought to have referred to one another as brothers and exchanged valuable gifts such as lapis lazuli, gold, silver, chariots, and horses. It conveyed discontent regarding the incarceration of a messenger from Kardashian Enlil of Babylon in Egypt for a duration of less than 6 years, along with a girl of Hittite descent. He also included 30 women, likely proficient in weaving, embroidery, and other Asian arts. In his official documents, the pharaoh ostentatiously characterized these immigrants and offerings as tribute from the chiefs of retinue. The pharaoh communicates with his vassals in Palestine and Syria using a more distant and authoritative tone. Along with the short introduction, the conclusion often includes an ominous threat, while sounding reassuringly submissive and calling the pharaoh their son and god. The official texts, on the other hand, called these people immigrants and offerings that the pharaoh demanded from the chiefs of retinue. Among the limited surviving drafts of letters from the pharaoh to his fellow sovereigns, he primarily addressed marriage negotiations concerning their daughters. Despite inciting the rebellion, foreign princesses were met with a suitably subservient response from the vassals, who referred to the pharaoh as their son and god. Their situations are unlikely to be unique. Following Gilukhipa's demise, Amenhotep III married her niece Tadukhipa, presumably on her deathbed. Extended negotiations frequently culminated in sending a bride and her retinue, symbolizing a concrete diplomatic alliance. Upon reaching an agreement regarding her dowry, the pharaoh presented her with a bride price, affording her an additional opportunity for negotiation. Inventories of the trousseau belonging to these princesses resemble a catalogue of a state treasury, encompassing gold, jewels, gold and silver vessels, horses, chariots, weapons, beds, chests, and other gilded items, mirrors and braziers crafted from bronze, bronze instruments and vessels, intricately embroidered garments, bed linens, and stone vessels filled with oils, spices, and similar commodities. The commemorative scarab indicates that the entourage likely comprised numerous adept sewists, musicians, and a formidable armed escort. Similar to other royal gifts, we always list the amount of gold and silver used to make and decorate different items. We do this to ensure fairness in all transactions. The commemorative scarab indicates that the retinues likely comprised numerous adept needlewomen, musicians, and a formidable armed escort. Stones, opaque glass, ivory artifacts, stone containers, oils, gold and silver sculptures, garments, fine linen, and particularly gold were used in crafted and bullion forms for which Egypt was renowned. In the context of autarky, when private commerce was limited, these marriages arranged with the Hittites, Babylonians, Mitannians, and local dynasties functioned as significant state trading ventures. Foreign monarchs correspond with their Egyptian counterparts to solicit amicable relations or to express grievances regarding transgressions against their citizens. Burnaburiash submitted 2 grievances regarding the looting of caravans and the murder of merchants on Egyptian territory. The pharaoh ought to recompense him and penalize the offenders. The king of Alashia negotiated a price for a consignment of wood that Egyptians had stolen from Alashia. While the man's wife and child remained in Alashia, he requested that Burnaburiash address 2 grievances regarding the looting of caravans and the murder of merchants on Egyptian soil. Upon learning that Bedouins had harassed Pharaoh's envoys within his domain, Burnaburiash sought out and apprehended the offenders. Eastern nations esteemed and sought the favor of Egypt, owing to its significant gold reserves in the Eastern Desert, Nubia, and Sudan. All these foreign sovereigns requisitioned gold from the pharaoh. Expedite the dispatch of substantial quantities of gold, as I require it to complete my undertaking, for it is akin to dust in my brother's land. This is the predominant theme of their correspondence. When they are not soliciting gold, they lament the inadequate amounts received or the inferior quality upon inspection. During the latter years of Amenhotep III, the great powers maintained amicable relations with Egypt, as evidenced by the Nephilim correspondence in the Amarna Letters. Nevertheless, the correspondence implies that the vassal princes may disregard the allegations of treachery, plunder, intimidation, and chaos unless they acknowledge them sincerely. The king's commissioners could manage the situation and maintain oversight of the 2 rulers by leveraging Egyptian troops from garrison towns and local loyalists and manipulating them against each other. a condition of persistent conflict and scheming is impacting the vassal princes. It was considered prudent to exhibit military strength earlier in the reign when Pharaoh visited Sidon and dispatched troops to assist Ribadi of Byblos against Abdi Shirt of Amuru. Warnings did not dissuade these infamous troublemakers from their incessant plots, resulting in their forceful expulsion from the location. It was unavoidable that new dissidents would assume their roles upon their disappearance. Thutmose's assertive foreign policy and organizational acumen consistently enhanced Egypt's power and prosperity. As soon as Amenhotep III took the throne, his warnings didn't stop these notorious plotters from working on their never-ending schemes, and they were eventually kicked out of the palace. Their disappearance inevitably paved the way for the emergence of new dissenters. The new dissenters included serfs and other subordinate laborers, the spearmen and charioteers from Palestine and Syria, the infantry from Libya, and the shock troops and police from Nubia and Sudan seized greater opportunities for an improved existence in Egypt. A considerable quantity of exotic raw materials was imported into Egypt via tributes or state trading: horses, cattle, fine timber, lapis lazuli, silver and bronze from Asia, Libyan oxen, and hides, pelts, ostrich feathers, ebony, ivory, apes, incense, gums, resins, minerals and gold from Africa. Equally valuable are the iron dagger blades of Mitanni, the red and purple golds of Babylon, the lapis lazuli jewelry of Mitanni, the gold and silver rhytons, ewers, and bowls of the Aegean, the metalwork, ivory oil horns, combs, embroidered garments, leatherwork, and chariots of Syria, as well as the weapons, ebony furniture, and ivory implements of Kush. Rich people moving into a worldly society changed traditional Egyptian culture. Egyptian cultures adopted the fashions of the court and had a lot of foreign princesses and their entourages. This made classical expressions less strict, shapes softer, colors brighter, and life added to them. Egyptian culture in the New Kingdom is very different from that of the Old Kingdom because of its many interactions with the Amorites, Hurrians, Indo-Europeans, and Pre-Hellenes in the late Bronze Age. Egypt's civilization diminished numerous characteristics following the Hyksos period and assimilated those of other Eastern Mediterranean nations. He guided his people as an athlete, charioteer, and divine sovereign in warfare and tranquility. Marianne's paladins and courtiers exert control over Asian society. The pagan respect for personal achievement and pride in worldly success is likely due to the influence of foreign spouses, slaves, and government officials. These traits were unique to the time period and can be seen beautifully in the paintings of past grandeur on the walls of the Theban tomb chapels. After Thutmose IV's reign, Amenhotep III presided over a prolonged and stable rule. The king and his officials provided substantial financial support, enabling 2 or 3 generations of painters, sculptors, architects, and artisans to enhance their skills and meet elevated standards. No other era in Egyptian history has reached such an extraordinary level of artistic expression, encompassing monumental statues, intricately carved jewels, pervasive stone sculptures, and diminutive wooden and ivory figurines, as well as the magnificence of the Luxor Temple and the newfound allure of the elegantly painted mud shrine at Wadi Sebwa. Artisans of glass, faience, ivory, bronze, gemstones, and textiles during this era exhibited a penchant for opulence, undoubtedly influenced by the refined preferences of cultured Asia. The Age of Opulence is the most fitting descriptor for the era of Amenhotep the Magnificent. During his second year of reign, the cattle hunt scarab indicates that the king resided in Upper Egypt, likely at western Thebes. Subsequently, during his reign, he possessed a palace in Medinet Habu, whose contemporary designation may allude to his influential minister Amenophis, son of Hapu. Diverse excavators and successive generations of locals have excavated its approximately 80 acres in pursuit of any discoverable artifacts. The Metropolitan Museum expedition has ascertained that the palace, initially referred to as the House of Nebmat Re Shines like Aten, and subsequently the House of Rejoicing, was excavated by numerous archaeologists and successive generations of locals, who scoured its approximately 80 acres in search of artifacts. Constructed as circumstances dictate, structures facing expansive courtyards have no association other than their closeness. Activities took place in this palatial city. This palatial city constructed its roofs using wooden rafters affixed to matting and coated with straw-bound mud. Wooden columns, positioned on limestone bases, upheld the ceilings of the larger rooms, which ascended above the general roof level, similar to those at Amarna. In the bathroom, the palace is the nucleus of an extensive array of edifices oriented toward vast courtyards, each designed to accommodate specific events and their absence. The roofs were wooden rafters affixed to matting and coated with straw-bound mud. The aesthetic is more vivid and animated than that of modern tomb paintings. The sparse and ravaged ruins are challenging to envision in their prime. However, upon completion, the mud brick chambers would have featured wooden elements such as doors and window frames, predominantly painted, with some gilded and likely inlaid with colored faience to denote the names and titles of the king and queen. The dim light from the clerestory windows probably gave the inside of these rooms a flickering radiance of bright colors. The rooms were furnished with gilded ebony and cedarwood chests, beds, stools, and chairs, rushwork stands decorated with flower arrangements, leather cushions with blue and red checkered patterns, and other items. Only fragments of tableware have survived in significant quantities from this oriental splendor. However, examining the domestic furniture articles interred with Yuya, Tuyu, and Tutankhamun, all of whom were close relatives of the king, can offer insights into the appearance of the palaces. These relatives likely resided for a portion of their lives within the confines of Malkata Palace. In addition to the House of Rejoicing in Thebes, it is highly probable that Amenhotep possessed a palace in Memphis and additional residences, including a hunting lodge at Medine el Ghorab in the Fayyum. The Theban palace was linked by a causeway to a funerary temple dedicated to Amun and the king's mortuary cult, located approximately a mile to the north, which was likely the largest of the monuments that adorned the most fertile areas of Thebes. It was initially utilized as a convenient quarry 150 years after the founder's demise, ridiculing his claim that it was established forever and for all eternity. The temple originally measured nearly 70 feet, with its entrance adjacent, but only 2 quartzite colossi of the king persist. Petrie discovered a grey granite stela exceeding 10 feet in height, interred within the remnants of the adjacent funerary temple of Meneptah in 1896. It was originally positioned in the temple of Ameno. The temple once extended nearly 70 feet, with its entrance flanking it, but only 2 quartzite colossi of the king persist. The Luxor Temple, Amaru or Viewing Temple, located in western Thebes, and the temple at Sulb, approximately 50 miles north of the Third Cataract of the Nile. Amenhotep constructed numerous grand edifices for Amun-Re in Thebes and Nubia. It is essential to delineate the characteristics of the additional structures within this stele and the mortuary temple. Gold adorned it, and high-quality white sandstone served as its construction material. Silver adorned the floor, while electrum embellished the portals. A remarkable stela adorned its expansive elongated form with gold-hued stones. Elephantine granite, a resilient stone, constituted the material for the statues of the king. Silver lined its floor, and electrum embellished its portals. The sun ascended beyond the heavens at its rise, presenting a breathtaking spectacle. The sun adorned its flagstaffs with electrum. Water from the Nile filled a sacred lake. Numerous male and female servants and foreign captives staffed the offices, and its storerooms held countless treasures. At Karnak, Amenhotep contributed minimally, constructing only a splendid triumphal gate, the third pylon, to the temple of Amun. He erected a temple dedicated to the ancient Theban deity Mont on a historical foundation in the northern precincts of the Amun complex. Presently, only the ground plan of this temple endures. Approximately a quarter-mile to the south, adjacent to a crescent-shaped lake called Ashru, the Pool of the Lion, is another dilapidated structure devoted to Mut, the consort of Arnun. Numerous granite statues represent Mut as Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war from the Memphite civilization. Almost every Egyptian collection contains an instance of these colossal statues appropriated by subsequent rulers. The southern sanctuary of Luxor, historically known as Karnak, houses the most remarkable edifices of Amenhotep III. Amenhotep, the king's architect, built the magnificent temple in year 35, dedicated to the Theban triad of Arnun, Mut, and their progeny, Khons. Adjacent to the sanctuary were chambers housing emblems, garments, vessels, and offerings. At the same time, a columned hall alongside the vestibule illustrated the Theogamy, or divine birth of the king, showcasing all elements present in the well-preserved reliefs of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri, her mortuary temple. Isis and Khnum guide Mutamwir to the birthing chamber, while Amun assumes the role of Tuthmosis IV in this context. The temple, once magnificent, was embellished with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, colored opaque glass, and sculptures crafted from both firm and soft stones. However, only a few scattered and appropriated remnants exist today. Notwithstanding its dilapidated condition and modifications, the temple's magnificence endures, particularly at dawn when the Theban radiance imparts an almost diaphanous quality. There is a striking contrast between the broad courts, which are lit by broad light, and the rows of papyrus bud columns which cast dense diagonal shadows. There is also a perfect balance between the main building and the raised colonnade with its huge comminform capitals. Amenhotep III commissioned a distinguished architect to fulfill the stringent specifications of the Egyptian temple, embodying a cosmological myth in stone. However, the project remained unfinished during the subsequent reign, following his deposition for unspecified reasons. Amenhotep III erected significant edifices in numerous major cities of Egypt throughout his extensive reign. He constructed the monumental structure at Medinet Habu. In accordance with his dynasty's tradition, he constructed temples at Athribis and Bubastis in the Delta, and an elegant kiosk on Elephantine for his second Jubilee. Significant remnants of his temple remain at Sulb, the frontier of his empire in Sudan. Queen Tiye commissioned the adjacent temple of Sedeinga, devoted to the goddess Hathor. Their exceptional artistry distinguished the magnitude and extent of Queen Tiye's commission for the adjacent temple of Sedeinga, dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Psychologists must determine whether the immense impulse reflected the king's aspirations or merely represented the pride of his architects, artists, and officials in the power and significance of Egypt under the rule of their pharaoh. Nonetheless, Amenhotep III's reign unequivocally emphasized the pharaoh's divinity. Amenhotep III's reign undoubtedly emphasized the pharaoh's divine status, despite his likely veneration as a deity. The image of Sulb is significant. Even Sulb himself reveres the image of Sulb at Sulb. The Egyptians once regarded the pharaoh as their supreme god, while Sedinga honored Queen Tia as their local patroness. Queen Tia embodied a singular, universal, and supreme deity throughout the dynasty. Despite the numerous other queens during Amenhotep III's reign, Queen Tai retained her status as the king's chief wife, likely due to her bearing several sons, including the heir apparent. Many statues and reliefs portray her as her husband's attendant, typically on a diminished scale. Her name frequently appears in ceremonial inscriptions. Tushratta of Mitanni composed a letter, Canon number 26, following the demise of Amenhotep III, requesting the continuation of favorable relations between Egypt and his country. They upheld her cult for many years posthumously, and deified her at Sedinga during her lifetime. She had the right to claim the title of heiress. Her cult persisted for many years, following her death and her deification at Sedinga during her lifetime. A prominent priesthood managed one of her funerary estates in Thebes. Today, the village of Adaya, located near Sedinga, and the town of Tanta are named after her. Amenhotep III had a limited number of other native and foreign wives. This century has seen the emergence of fragments of canopic jars featuring Princess Tiaha, Queen Henut, and Princess Nebet-Nuhe in the market. Considering the mortality rate of the ancient world during that period, no direct descendants of the king survived 15 years posthumously. Amenhotep III bestowed gold adornments and splendid tombs in western Thebes upon them as a reward for their loyalty and proficiency during his reign. He received support chiefly from Amenhotep, the son of an inconsequential individual named Hapu, from the delta town of Athribis, whose family would ascend to prominence in Memphis and Thebes. A related Amenhotep from the delta, who occupied several significant roles, including controller of works in Memphis, treasurer, and overseer of the double granary of Egypt, served as the king's high steward in Memphis. He asserts that his parents were comparatively humble, yet his abilities secured him a role as a personal secretary to the king. Like his namesake and close relative, he was a scribe for the elite forces and later designated as treasurer, steward, and architect. He was responsible for constructing the mortuary temple of Amenhotep III in Memphis, an undoubtedly impressive and magnificent edifice, although nothing remains of it. Between 1923 and 1936, Sir Robert Mond rehabilitated Ramoses' tomb at Thebes, a prominent tourist destination. Although he attended the king's first Jubilee, his brief tenure as an official pertains to the subsequent reign and beyond. Memphite Amenhotep, the northern vizier, operated in tandem with Ramoses. The Theban necropolis contains the tombs of southern officials, such as Menkeper, the mayor of Memphis, and northern officials, including Amenhotep III and Queen Tai. The most notable are the exquisitely crafted chapels of Ka-Emhet, the overseer of the granaries of Upper and Lower Egypt, and his spouse. Each tomb chapel illustrates the owner experiencing his most joyous moment on earth amidst the king's Jubilee celebrations during his lifetime. Keruef, the high steward of the queen. Each tomb chapel illustrates the owner commemorating his most significant moment on earth during the king's Jubilee celebrations of his lifetime. Their exquisite drawings, intricate details, and skillful carving distinguish them. Upon reflection, they symbolize the ultimate expression of their kind in the Theban necropolis, exemplified by a vibrant energy that is on the verge of decay. The same color of sunset shines on the glue tempera paintings on the walls of modern tomb chapels. These paintings, when put in context, seem to show a longing for the life that was lived on earth rather than acceptance of the life that is to come. Like the reliefs, they exhibit confident delineation, while their colors are vibrant yet cohesive. Fragments of a splendid tomb believed to be associated with Neb Arnun are displayed in the British Museum alongside the tombs of the two sculptors and the overseer of Crown Lands Menna. Other painted tomb chapels have kept pieces of the reign alive, even though they are in awful shape. These and other monuments help us figure out what the king's officials did for a living. His 3 jubilees, conducted in the regnal years 30, 34, and 37, signified the culmination of his reign. The festival of the falcon death god Sokar coincided with the coronation event in Memphis. The tomb of Kheruef features an inscription indicating that he undertook meticulous research to guarantee the accurate performance of the rituals. The tomb of Kheruef features an inscription indicating that he undertook meticulous research to guarantee the correct performance of the rites. These rites were conducted in the final hours of the night, culminating in a triumphant recoronation at dawn. The author asserts that depictions of the king during his jubilees were misconstrued as indicating that Amenhotep had been slain and deified in this mystery play. Alongside his jubilees, the king engaged in additional ceremonies that necessitated substantial preparation. Producing new garments, accessories, and other necessities was also imperative. Individuals from Egypt, Africa, and Asia presented opulent offerings to commemorate the king's coronation. The damaged reliefs of Surero, which commemorate the second jubilee of the king and queen, depict an extensive collection of extraordinary peripheral temples built at Thebes and Elephantine awaiting consecration. Depictions from the first jubilee adorned a temple at Sulb, encircled by obelisks. They constructed remarkable peripheral temples at Thebes and Elephantine to commemorate the second jubilee. They conducted festivities, transporting effigies of deities from their cultic sites to Memphis. These functions culminated in allocating substantial quantities of consecrated food, and we are fortunate to possess a record of the procedure. These events led to the dissemination of vast amounts of sacred food. Fortunately, we possess documentation of the food distributed at Thebes, derived from fragmented pottery vessels discovered in the midden heaps and within the remnants of the Malkata Palace. These vessels contained meat, beverages, and condiments. Documents substantiate the king's lifestyle. We can ascertain which officials were engaged during the 3 jubilees by analyzing the 3 pivotal documents. The name of Thutmoses IV is inscribed on the foundation deposits at the entrance, indicating that the construction of the king's sepulchre likely commenced early in his reign. This gorge, a section of the western branch of the Biban el-Moluk, functioned as his interment location. This hypogeum, unlike its predecessor, features a buri. This gorge, part of the western branch of the Biban el-Moluk, functioned as his burial site. Rydor bears a resemblance to its design. The corridor bifurcates into 3 segments, each inclined towards a well chamber, embellished with depictions of the king flanked by deities. The remains of Queens Taye and Sitamun are believed to be in 2 expansive, columned chambers that extend from the principal funerary hall. The inclined staircase through the 2-columned hall ascends to an expansive, columned sepulchral chamber featuring a painted celestial ceiling. This chamber contains a single intact red granite sarcophagus lid and 1 fractured lid. Many scavengers have gathered the scant remains of the most lavish burial ever documented. In 1898, researchers uncovered the mummy of his grandfather, Amenhotep II. The expedition re-identified the tomb in 1799. In antiquity, thieves dismembered Amenhotep III's mummy to extract the valuable amulets that safeguarded it, causing significant damage. In 1898, scholars uncovered the mummy of his grandfather, Amenhotep II. The soft tissues of the king's cranium had largely deteriorated, providing sufficient information to approximate his stature and alopecia at the time of death. He possessed sparse tufts of hair at the temples. He experienced the loss of an additional tooth before his demise, alongside his upper incisors. In his final years, he endured toothaches, dental complications, and alveolar abscesses. Tushratta of Mitanni dispatched a statue of Ishtar of Nineveh during her second visit to Egypt, her cherished land, in the year 36, signifying a decline in his health. They infused resin and natron beneath his skin to create a lifelike semblance. The ruling house of Thebes utilized alternative materials for mummification 4 centuries after Dynasty 20, 1080-945 BC. The embalmers may have employed exceptional techniques to mummify Amenhotep III, due to his significant obesity at the time of his death. Numerous statues and reliefs illustrate his final years, adhering to the conventional idealism of Egyptian court art. As outlined at the start of our documentary, scholars have had to depend on fragmented and insufficient evidence to understand the events surrounding the Amarna period. The interpretation of these sources leads to disputes regarding Akhenaten's character and historical significance. The comprehensive chronology of events during the Ramesside period is intricate due to the obliteration or distortion of records. However, a few items have evaded destruction or falsification. Discovered at Ghurab, a contemporary papyrus letter dating to the 5th year of his reign identifies the king as Amenhotep. Distinguishing the year 4 on 3 significantly impaired boundary stelae at Amarna has proven difficult. The others originate from year 6. 2 of them also contain an 8-year codicil. At Amarna, 2 tombs depict a foreign tribute ceremony from year 12. Between years 5 and 6, the king and queen altered their names. Between years 8 and 12, their deity, Aten, modified its instructional name. The subsequent sections will present the dates for these events. Due to the numerous name changes, monuments can be organized according to their chronological order within the reign. However, this process requires caution, as inscriptions bearing earlier names have occasionally been modified to align with later iterations. Consequently, Egyptologists have classified the monuments based on the number of historical princesses who accompanied the royal couple. This equation provides a general indication of the timeline, as Nefertiti had 6 documented daughters. The boundary stelae from year 8 depicts 3, while the representation from year 12 illustrates all 6. Anachronisms occurred due to the rapid execution of extensive construction projects and the scarcity of skilled labor and competent supervisors in ancient Egypt, particularly at Amarna. Subjects for carving and painting were left over from earlier eras, and the staff only slowly and inadequately updated them, preferring to repeat the established pattern that was improved through repeated imitation. In the initial iteration of the Aten's name, the royal family venerated the Aten with the presence of a single daughter, whereas in year 12, the royal family accepted foreign tribute with only 3 princesses in attendance. It is infeasible to ascertain the date of any Amarna scene based on the number of daughters accompanying their parents. Many non-Egyptian authors and intellectuals have shaped the understanding of Akhenaten, the Amarna period, and its subsequent effects. This chapter offers a conventional perspective on the reign primarily derived from Breasted's chapter in the initial edition of Cambridge Ancient History. Since the updated edition is not currently accessible, we will analyze the issues presented by the Amarna period in the subsequent section of this book. We will also present some implicitly acknowledged information from the recent past. Amenhotep IV inherited a challenging circumstance from his father, Amenhotep III, upon his ascension. Pharaohs who conquered Asia in the early part of the dynasty suppressed insurrections and minor conflicts with remarkable severity. Nomadic bands of Hapiru freebooters instigated turmoil in Palestine, while Egypt's ally Mitanni faced pressure from a resurgent Hatti, inciting discord in Syria among their disloyal vassal states. The new king's advisors comprised his mother, Tiye, his chief queen, Nefertiti, and I, the spouse of her nurse. Instead of helping his friend Mitanni, the young king was deeply interested in modern theological philosophy. It was these thoughts that helped him develop the ideals and goals that made him the most famous pharaoh and the first to achieve this title. In Dynasty 18, Egypt expanded into a global empire, introducing the notion that the sun governed all nations, not solely Egypt. The material sun, known as the Aten or disk, was established as the exclusive and supreme deity during the reign of Amenhotep III. The new symbol depicted the Aten as a sun disk, emitting various beams that terminated in human hands. Some of the beams gave life to the king and queen's nostrils, which meant that God was in charge of the world and human affairs. This external symbol may possess a universal significance in Egypt's foreign territories, that the anthropomorphic or zoomorphic representations of the ancient deities lacked entirely. The deity's extended or instructional name was encased within two cartouches, akin to a pharaoh's, which rendered it reminiscent of a celestial sovereign with omnipotent authority. The pharaoh's fervor for the new cult was apparent from the outset. Consequently, due to the construction of a grand temple dedicated to Aten at Karnak, Thebes was rebranded as the City of the Radiance of Aten, rather than the City of Amun. Given Amun's ascendance in power and affluence during the dynasty, the priesthood of the former deity of Thebes could not overlook these developments. They would have replaced Amenhotep IV with one of their candidates, the young visionary who is currently in charge, if he wasn't such a decent person and came from a line of rulers who were too strong for a priesthood as powerful as Thutmose III's. Subsequently, the old deities and Aten engaged in fierce conflict. Aten emerged as the singular deity in reality and ideology when the king grew intolerant of the cults in Thebes. Amun endured significant persecution. Amun divested priests of their positions, ceased temple worship, and eliminated the names of deities from monuments. During this excision, Amenhotep rebranded himself as Akhenaten, disregarding his father's cartouche. After Thebes' abandonment in the Bronze Age, Akhenaten established himself in Middle Egypt. By age 6, he pledged never to abandon his new town. Expansive palaces and temples accommodated the king, Nefertiti, Tiye, and other royal family members. The great Temple of the Sun's Disk, situated within an expansive enclosure, functions as the global epicenter of Aten worship. The semicircular cliffs encircling the site hewn an ancient royal tomb into the wadi. Officials of Akhenaten sculpted tombs in the southern foothills and northern cliffs. The new courtiers, rather than the traditional ruling families, were accountable for the pharaoh's progress. Their tomb chapels, adorned with reliefs and inscriptions venerating the Aten and Akhenaten, provide our understanding of the king's new doctrine. The royal poet's vision of a global faith illustrates the universalism of the Egyptian empire, which supplanted nationalism for 2 centuries. The hymn located in I's tomb is ascribed to Akhenaten. He refers to Aten as the progenitor of all creations, irrespective of race or nationality. Akhenaten comprehended the notion of a world sovereign upon recognizing the Creator's benevolent intent. Akhenaten once lived. Akhenaten's doctrine uniquely emphasizes Ma'at, or truth. The king unequivocally ascribed a lasting significance to the phrase, living in truth, by publicly showcasing his family life. He seemed to have a cordial and unpretentious relationship with his queen and daughters, who also engaged in temple services alongside him. The king instructed Beck, chief sculptor, and court artists to illustrate his vision. Ultimately, it was a beautiful and unembellished realism that was both novel and direct. Wild bulls vaulted over hounds and evaded their quarry in a papyrus thicket. Notwithstanding his physical deformities, King Akhenaten was not immune to the dictates of the new artistic paradigm. Artists portrayed him as he was, rather than in an idealized manner, reflecting their perception of him. He disregarded the empire's matters while engrossed in his extensive construction endeavors at Amarna and failed to recognize the necessity for urgent measures until it was too late. As the Egyptian Empire in Asia disintegrated, the Hittites and their allies progressively eroded Egyptian dominance in Syria. In year 12 at Akhenaten, tributes from Asia and Kush were received, with the Pharaoh and Nefertiti depicted splendidly. However, no additional levies were documented. A state visit by Queen Tiye to Akhenaten this year may have alerted her son to the domestic and international circumstances resulting from his policies. Individuals harbored animosity toward repressing their ancient deities, prompting priestly factions to undermine their doctrines overtly or covertly. The discontent within the military stemmed from his pacifist foreign policy and the forfeiture of Asian territories. Following a profound crisis, the king confronted reality for the first time. To settle the conflict with the Amun priests, Merit-Aten's eldest daughter, Smenkhkare, was wed to Smenkhkare, a young prince appointed co-regent and dispatched to Thebes. Nefertiti, believing a policy change was unwarranted, withdrew to a palace at the northern extremity of Akhenaten with her second surviving daughter's spouse, Tutankhaten. The Amarna revolution concluded abruptly with Nefertiti's death, allowing orthodoxy to prevail again under Tutankhaten. After 2 years, Akhenaten passed away in his 17th regnal year, the longest recorded duration for Akhenaten. Smenkhkare likely preceded him. Tutankhamun, as stated by his mother, was no older than 9 at his ascension, suggesting he was guided by prominent advisors, initially Nefertiti and subsequently I, who became the Egyptian vizier and de facto ruler by marrying Nefertiti's nurse after her demise. His persuasion likely resulted in the abandonment of Akhenaten, prompting the court's return to Thebes, where the priests of Amun regained their prominence. Ankhesenamun and Tutankhamun were required to alter their names to restore the monuments and endowments of the ancient deities. Following the abandonment of Akhenaten, a settlement of squatters emerged in its vicinity. According to a docket discovered in his tomb, Tutankhamun reigned for 9 years, commencing from his 10th regnal year. However, he passed away before Amenhotep III could restore the previous order. Even though most of his monuments above ground have been destroyed, he would still be seen as one of the more temporary pharaohs, because his tomb is the only royal grave in the Biban el-Moluk that is mostly still in one piece and full of treasures. The tablets unearthed near Boghaz-Köy in Anatolia indicate that the widow of the Hittite king had no male heirs to perpetuate his dynastic lineage. She corresponded with Suppiluliumas, the Hittite monarch, to solicit one of his sons for marriage, thereby ascending to the position of Pharaoh of Egypt. The Hittite king dispatched Prince Zenanza, who ultimately encountered execution in Egypt, notwithstanding this atypical request. Suppiluliumas assaulted and vanquished Egyptian forces between Lebanon and anti-Lebanon. The tomb of Tutankhamun illustrates him conducting the final rites for his predecessor, whose interment he oversaw. After King Ai's brief rule, Tutankhamun designated General Har-Emhab as his deputy. The city god appointed Mutnojme as queen, and upon his arrival in Thebes, The military and the priesthood acknowledged him as Amun's rightful heir. Har-Emhab exhibited his capacity to govern public matters through his relentless endeavors to re-establish order and prosperity within the state. Akhenaten's edict, preserved only in a fragmented condition, illustrates his apprehension regarding mitigating abuses within central and local governance. As a result, the populace, especially those with low incomes, faced oppression and had their goods and services expropriated. Capricious levies deplete the state treasury and impose severe sanctions. Corrupt inspectors and avaricious tax collectors compromised the judiciary. In addition to restoring Egypt's wealth and power, he also raised the morale of those who had been affected by the religious conflict. These people had been having a difficult time because of jealous gods and dishonest people. Throughout the region, Har-Emhab restored temples, reinstated their daily offerings and endowments, and appointed priests and temple officials alongside committed military personnel. This enabled the populace to recommence veneration of the deities. He adhered to the same policy as his predecessors. Har-Emhab also appropriated the monuments they had constructed as renouncers of the Aten religion and expunged their names from the official royal lists. Tutankhamun rehabilitated the monuments obliterated by Akhenaten's Nephilim across the territory with stonemasons. Akhenaten dismantled structures and transported stone for alternative utilization. Excavations revealed stone chests, sarcophagi, and reliefs in the royal tombs in the central wadi. A contemporary writer employs a highly dramatic expression to characterize the alleged vindictiveness of Akhenaten's followers' tomb chapels as the vengeance of Har-Emhab. In the Temple of Amun, thousands of stone blocks served as foundations and fill for 3 pylons and additional constructions following the demolition of Karnak's Grand Temple. They evaded Akhenaten whenever feasible,